our last video, we took you through the sea to sky region of British Columbia, struggling to hike the Chief, exploring Garibaldi Lake, and getting in our camper van to begin an epic road trip through the Canadian Rockies, with Maligne Lake, Emerald Lake, Stanley Glacier, and Marble Canyon.
In this video, we're heading to iconic Lake Louise in Banff National Park and hiking an unexpectedly beautiful hike called Iceline, before we road trip in our camper van through the Icefields Parkway, stopping at the Columbia Icefields. Then, we'll head on to Jasper National Park, where we met a majestic moose, cruised Maligne Lake with some more unexpected breathtaking hikes, astrophotography, and finally ending our trip where the dinosaurs roamed in the Drumheller Badlands.
Lake Louise is one of the most popular sites in the world for a reason. Breathtaking mountains surrounding a glacial blue lake are hard to beat. I had wanted to visit Lake Louise for nearly a decade, so I was nervous we wouldn't get in.
Thankfully, we got there early enough, skipping breakfast and arriving at 7:30 a.m. We spent some time taking in the sights, the majestic mountains, and the beautiful blue of the glacial lake. It was also a great time for a photo shoot before the crowds arrived.
After a quick bagel, we headed back out to hike the Lake Agnes Trail to the tea house. As a tea enthusiast, I was super pumped to hike to a tea house and try their tea.
With rain on the forecast, I was hoping we could hike past the tea house for better views, but it was not to be.
The hike wasn't too bad. This is a 7.4 kilometer round trip with only 435 meters of elevation gain. We stopped at Mirror Lake on the way before making it to the tea house.
It was raining when we got to the tea house, so I left Taylor in line while I explored the area, looking for a sheltered place to drink our tea.
I was happy to wait in line just to try the tea. The Lake Agnes Tea House was built in 1901 as a refuge for hikers who were traveling to higher locations. Around 4 years later, it started serving tea to hikers passing through.
I joined Taylor back in line, and we managed to get a seat on the patio. We ordered tea and debated if it was worth attempting the big beehive if we couldn't see anything. I wasn't really interested in a repeat of Panorama Ridge.
The tea house was busy, so after we finished our tea, we waited along the side of the tea house for the weather to clear. While waiting, we saw chipmunks scampering about and birds bopping around. I loved it.
When it started snowing and sleeting, we decided to call it a day and head back down. I was feeling sad, but as we made our way down, we ran across some trail runners who said they couldn't see anything from the top, so I felt a bit better.
Reaching Lake Louise, we were greeted by a sea of people. I could not believe the contrast when we visited in the early morning hours, and I'm very glad that we went when we did.
We were also greeted by an incredibly moody scene, with the snow and rain sloughing off the mountains over the lake. I took a few more shots, which ended up being some of my favorite photos of all time, and one of my most popular prints. When the storm started to roll through again, we decided to head back to camp. Unfortunately, the showers were closed due to COVID, so I jumped in the glacial stream behind our campsite. Despite the frigid water, I was just happy to be clean. As night fell, I took a time lapse with our camper van in the stars.
We originally planned on doing Maligne Lake the morning after we went to Lake Louise, but since we've already done that, we had a free day.
I thought it would be a good idea to do the Iceline Trail back in Yoho National Park. The man we rented our camper van from said this was his favorite hike in the Rockies, and now it's one of my favorites too.
I was a bit nervous as this is a 21.7 kilometer loop with 978 meter elevation gain, and we only had 1 day to complete it. I'm a bit afraid to hike in the dark.
Understandably. The Iceline hike begins with switchbacks through a lush green forest, offering glimpses of the Takaka Falls in the distance. This is where most of the elevation gain happens.
After ascending, the trail opened up to a rocky limestone landscape, which I thought might be shale, but I realized I don't know what shale is since I'm not a geologist. This section offered stunning 360-degree views of mountain peaks, various glaciers, and a distant meadow.
The hike continued along the icy ridge, aka Iceline, with relatively consistent elevation, providing great opportunities to admire the surrounding glaciers. We did a mini photo shoot with us and the glaciers in the background. There was this hill slightly off the path that everyone seemed to be going up, so I encouraged Taylor to hike it too.
After our short detour, we went back to the rocky terrain. I was pumped to reach the meadow. It looked so lush and green with wildflowers, but every time I thought we were about to enter the meadow, the path would turn and continue along the rocks. I felt deceived, but eventually we made it to the meadow.
We were greeted by a Columbia ground squirrel on entry. I tried to get photos of it, but it was too agile for me to get a clear shot. I told Taylor we needed to pick up the pace, otherwise we'd be hiking in the dark.
My fears. The meadow was probably my favorite part of the hike. We ended up in an area with huts that seemed to be some sort of camp, but it might actually be a wilderness hostel. I'm not really sure, but it looked really nice regardless. We just didn't see anyone there, so I don't even know if it was operational. Anyways, thankfully we arrived back before dark after about 10 hours of hiking, but it was a close call.
After a fulfilling day of hiking, we spent our second and last night at Lake Louise campground. We made our classic meal of sidekicks, stretched, and relaxed in the camper van. The next morning, it was time to leave Banff National Park and head north towards Jasper National Park, one of my favorite parts of the trip. Our day began along the Icefields Parkway, an iconic Canadian drive that everyone should do at some point in their life. It's one of the nicest drives I've ever done.
Our goal for the day was to reach the Columbia Icefields and do one of the tours. But first, we decided to stop at the Lake Louise Gondola to try and get an aerial view of grizzly bears.
It was a cool experience. Our tickets included breakfast, coffee or tea, and a ride on a chairlift to the top, where we were greeted by panoramic views and could see Lake Louise below.
As a skier, I love chairlifts and have been fascinated with what happens to ski hills when there is no snow, so I think this is worth a stop.
When we entered the Icefields Parkway, we lost cell phone service and Google Maps, but there were a lot of signs indicating cool viewpoints, so this wasn't really an issue. Our first stop was Bow Lake. We stopped for some photos and then decided to venture down a side road towards the lodge at Bow Lake for a different perspective. I didn't know what this was when we turned down the side road, but I saw some cool looking red buildings that ended up being the lodge. After taking a few more photos and videos, we continued down the road towards the Columbia Icefields, looking for our next place to stop.
Our next stop was the Saskatchewan River crossing. There's something about the river from this viewpoint that is really captivating. This is actually where 3 rivers meet.
When we got to the Columbia Icefields, we went inside and booked a tour. Typically, you can do a combo tour where you get to do both the skywalk and ride in an all-terrain ice explorer onto the Athabasca Glacier. But, unfortunately, due to COVID, the ice explorer portion wasn't offered, so we decided to book tickets just for the skywalk only.
The photos and videos of the skywalk looked incredible, so I was really excited. The thing is, those shots you see advertising the experience aren't really possible, so we felt a bit baited. While it was cool, I felt it was overpriced with just the skywalk. I think if we had the whole experience, maybe it would have been a bit better.
Taylor wanted to head back to our campsite, but I thought it would be fun to actually walk up to the Athabasca Glacier.
It's completely free and you can walk up to the glacier, just not on it because this is actually dangerous without a guided tour. As you walk down the path towards the glacier, they have signs showing where the edge of the glacier used to be during different years. It was really sobering seeing how far it has retreated since the year I was born. Experiences like this are a real example of a warming planet. We hopped back in the camper van and drove to Wilcox Campground. This is the only campground in the Icefields Parkway and it's first come, first served, so we didn't want to risk not getting a spot.
We drove around to find a campsite with the best views, then had a chill night overlooking the glacier.
And eating sidekicks.
And more sidekicks.
The next day we headed to Jasper National Park. The day was filled with a mix of planned stops and unexpected encounters showcasing the beauty and wonder of the Canadian Rockies. This was one of my favorite days as we made it to Maligne Lake. Unexpectedly, it is now one of my favorite places in the world.
We still had half the Icefields Parkway to drive, and our first stop was Sanwapta Falls, a great place to stretch your legs and get a snack.
After the falls, we went into a restaurant on the premises, and I made friends with this really cool bear before we headed to our next stop of Goats and Glaciers. There were no goats, but still a nice viewpoint. I do wish I saw a mountain goat though.
Jump ahead 2024, we saw the mountain goats. We pulled over at a few more scenic lookouts and continued toward Jasper National Park. Since we were making good time and the weather was hit or miss, we decided to book a boat ride on Maligne Lake.
The Maligne Lake boat cruise was one of my favorite experiences ever. We did the 1.5-hour classic cruise.
They had significantly reduced the number of people who could ride in the boat at one time because of COVID. We really appreciated having less people as it really helped us get better shots and take in the views. The boat took us to Spirit Island, a place that became famous when Kodak ran their color film ad and used this location.
Our guide was telling us history about the region and it has stuck with me. Spirit Island is a spiritual place for the Stoney Nakoda First Nation. They believe the mountains are a physical representation of their ancestors, with Spirit Island being surrounded by 3 sides of the same mountain range. This is very rare and significant. There is definitely an intimacy and peace around Spirit Island that I haven't really felt in other places I have visited in the world. My memory here is so special that I don't think I would go back by boat for a very long time. Perhaps I would canoe or kayak in the future though.
It truly was magical. I'm glad they limit the number of people who can visit this place, allowing only 15 minutes per boat. I spent my time getting a mix of shots with gorgeous lighting of a stormy sunset passing through the Hall of the Gods in the background. The time ran out quickly, but also made the experience even more special.
When we arrived back, I looked down a pathway and saw a moose walking right into the lake by the boathouse.
The moose literally almost ran into me, passing within a few feet as she rushed to the lake for her lunch.
I filmed the moose for probably 30 minutes. I assumed she would only be with us for a few moments, but she must have been used to people and was very happy eating.
It truly was a magical experience, watching the storm roll into this iconic place, stretching from the Hall of the Gods to this moose posing perfectly with the Maligne Lake cabin. This was one of my favorite wildlife experiences.
As we started to drive towards Wapiti Campground, we saw another moose right before Maligne Lake. I went from 0 moose in my life to 2 moose quite quickly.
I wanted to scout out a location for astrophotography, so we headed back to Maligne Lake. Jasper is a dark sky preserve, so I was really looking forward to this. Unfortunately, I was clouded out, which happens far more often than you'd think. Probably around 95% of the time I go to shoot astro.
For our first full day in Jasper, we headed out on a nice, easy hike to the Valley of the 5 Lakes. This is a 5-kilometer loop with a 165-meter elevation gain. It's pretty easy since it was mostly flat. After our hike, we headed to Jasper Brewing Co. This is Canada's first brewery in a national park. We had lunch and a beer flight. The weather was perfect and I didn't even need a coat.
Next up was Pyramid Lake. I thought it would be nice to get a time lapse of the stars with the Pyramid Mountain, so we headed over to the lake to scout it out. After claiming a parking spot, we spent some time exploring the tiny island, watching the sunset and relaxing.
Pyramid Mountain is actually one of my favorite mountains in the Rockies. It seems to have a really unique presence and I really love the color and shape. Maybe that sounds obvious, but trust me, when you see it, you'll get it.
We made dinner, waiting for it to get dark and hoping for a clear night so I could shoot the Milky Way. Unfortunately, again, the clouds showed up, ruining my dreams of clear skies. Next time. After a few hours of waiting for the clouds to clear, we headed back to our campsite to sleep. The next day, we met up with my friend to hike Folding Mountain. He told us if you make it to the top of Folding Mountain and take a picture for proof, Folding Mountain Brewery at the bottom will give you a free beer. Challenge accepted.
Folding Mountain is a 15.1 kilometer out and back trail just outside of Jasper National Park. The elevation gain is 1,125 meters and is considered a challenging route. Folding Mountain has become one of my favorite hikes in the area, and I don't think we would have known about it without our friend recommending it. The start of the trail is quite steep, but I was able to keep a good pace now that I have hiking poles. If only I had the poles earlier on in the trip.
The Folding Mountain hike actually has a couple of false summits with beautiful views, moving in and out of the trees with unique perspectives of the mountainous valley along the way.
There was a scramble to the very top that I attempted with Callum and our friend, but on my way up, I broke one of my new hiking poles and just froze in place.
The scramble was quite loose, but worth it to make it to the top, where there were panoramic views of the entire area. It was beautiful.
Meanwhile, I just waited on the scramble, also not sure how to make it down. I waited until I saw some trail runners sit in the shale and slide down. I decided they know best, so I did this as well and ripped my leggings on the way down. The descent down was a breeze, even with just one hiking pole. I am a lot more comfortable descending with hiking poles.
After our hike, we went to Folding Mountain Brewery for our free beer and dinner before Taylor and I headed back into Jasper. On the way, we saw a bunch of elk, even a couple redding, since it was redding season.
The next day, we woke up and went to Sunhouse Cafe in town. It was on the second floor of a building and had amazing views and was a perfect place to people watch. I recommend this cafe to anyone visiting Jasper. It's been a great trip.
After breakfast, we headed back through the Icefields Parkway towards the town of Banff. We made less stops, but pulled over whenever there was a reflective lake.
Banff is one of those places I have wanted to visit for a very long time. I knew we were going to meet up with my friends, so I saved our Banff exploration for the day I knew we were meeting up with her. We only met up with her for about an hour, but it was still nice to catch up.
Taylor's friend recommended we check out Lake Minnewaca for astrophotography, so we drove over to Lake Minnewaca, being greeted by some bighorn sheep.
I was really excited to finally see bighorn sheep. The last half of our trip was really amazing for wildlife.
We couldn't really find a good place to set up for astrophotography with our camper van at Lake Minnewaca, so we continued driving towards Two Jack Lake, which is very close to Lake Minnewaca. We found a cool spot to park overlooking the lake.
We walked around, down to the beach, and back up to our van for dinner. This was to explore, but also for Callum to find his favorite composition for Astro.
Yay!
Just as we got relaxed in our van, waiting for the stars to emerge, we heard a knock. There was a park ranger who asked where we were staying that night, and she told us that without a campsite booked, we couldn't sleep in Banff National Park. She said it was okay to take astrophotography, but that she would be back at 5 a.m. to make sure we weren't sleeping there. So, after I finished with my time lapse, I drove us to the closest place outside of Banff National Park, Canmore. We found a side street where there were no houses, businesses, or anything else, and slept there.
We woke up really early and thankfully didn't get in trouble from sleeping in our camper van on the streets of Canmore. When I peeked outside of the camper van, I was greeted by the cutest little bunnies. It was a really lovely way to start my morning, and in my eagerness to capture a video of them, I managed to whack my head off of the camper van window. It hurt, but honestly it was totally worth it for a closer look at the very cute bunnies.
After a quick stop for coffee and breakfast, we headed to Drumheller, the last stop on our trip, the land of the dinosaurs. The drive from Canmore to Drumheller took about 2.5 hours. To get into the prehistoric spirit, we listened to the Rise and Fall of Dinosaurs audiobook.
When planning our trip, I didn't really consider that it was the last weekend of summer. The Canadian Badlands were packed with families. We went to Horseshoe Canyon first. It was still cool to explore despite the crowds. Horseshoe Canyon goes back 70 million years to the Cretaceous period when dinosaurs roamed the area. Since the late 1800s, more than 1,000 dinosaur skeletons have been found in the Canadian Badlands with more than 44 species.
We drove around the region for a bit, away from the crowds, before heading to the Atlas Coal Mine. The Atlas Coal Mine is a National Historic Site that was operational from 1936 to 1979. It is considered the most complete historic coal mine in Canada, with the last standing wooden coal tipple in North America.
I thought this was a pretty cool site and our last major stop before we headed to Calgary to meet up with some of Callum's friends for dinner before flying back home the following day. Overall, this has been a really amazing trip. I am so glad that we went out to the Canadian Rockies. It reinvigorated my love for the outdoors, and this was a great first trip as a couple, and I can't wait for our next one.
I had such a great time exploring some of the most beautiful places that Canada has to offer with Taylor. It was my first time trying out van life, and I absolutely loved it. The freedom to explore and go at my own pace while finding great locations for astro shots was amazing. There's something meditative about exploring the mountains, something I fell in love with after my school exchange in Europe visiting the Alps. But that said, it's nice to mix things up, which I'm excited to do for our next trip to Costa Rica. Stay tuned. If you'd like to keep up with our travels and follow along on our journey, please consider subscribing, as your support really means a lot to us. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you in Costa Rica.
Bye for now.
Goodbye, my girls. Goodbye, my rams. You have been the goats. You've been the goats for me. What do you think of the moose? What do you think of the moose?
It's pretty awesome.
Good. Goodbye, moose. Say goodbye, moose. Okay, don't say goodbye, moose.
Oh, goodbye, moose.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
They probably stomp wider, don't they, when they dance?
You're telling me.
I don't know what that was.